Hello, this is another door. We're going to explain this time how it works. This is the observerless 9x9 built recently by me and Arma, but yeah, 832 blocks, and it's mostly made of mobs.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to build, and that's why we're just doing a quick explanation of how the main circuits work rather than a full build through. But what applies to the 9x9 should also apply to most of the other doors, and so you can get a general idea of how they work. We'll go through some of the specifics of some of the other doors as well.
But yeah, it's mostly a general overview of how these doors actually function rather than how they're built.
Exactly. Those barriers are for later. So the main thing that sets this door apart from any predecessors is this whole little worm assembly. So this is one of the main things we'll be focusing on, because most of the wiring goes into controlling how this worm assembly thing works, because both the opening and closing is just 3 worms. So convenient little sequence.
Yeah, and then the only other part to the door really is the tape. So
Yeah, and the tape is actually one of the simplest bits.
due to mobs. So yeah.
Yeah. If any of you have seen mob tapes before, you've seen this tape basically. And there we go. It's pretty much the door open there. So you can see that even without speeding it up, it's not a bad speed. So we're quite happy with how these doors turned out. They were sort of almost boring in how easy they were to make, but they're pretty cool. So the first thing to do is explain how this main piston worm concept works. Now this is the main part of the door. This is what pushes everything up. This is the main concept that allows this door to actually function. So it's quite important that we sort of understand how it works. And so I'm going to go through it very slowly. Got a command block there that's going to slow down the TPS. It's also important to mention this isn't actually a flying machine because it requires power at every point. So when we power this row of pistons will start pushing up. That pushes up this minecart that's floated towards it. It'll power that detector rail, powering the block. Now when this piston reaches the top of its extension, that updates this piston, which is getting budded. Now that's why we have these obsidian here, because otherwise this piston here, or the top piston, would have pushed down before because it would have had a high priority. But we can see now this is pushing up the next row, which enables it to bud the block, or bud the piston, and we'll see this sort of creates a chain reaction that propagates through the row of blocks, and this works no matter how long your row is. So we can see that it'll push up this one, then this one, then this one, and that will continue to the end. And we'll see a similar kind of thing happening at the end once it's already on the retraction. So we can see now what's going to happen is it's going to start retracting these pistons, and because it's gone through and is propagated in sequence, we're going to see the retraction is also going to do it in sequence. And that is important because when we go to power the next one, we obviously don't have an obsidian here. And so in order to not power this piston, we have to retract this piston, we have to retract it into a powered state. So that's good. That way it will stop to power immediately. And that's the only way of getting it to power the correct piston when there's no obsidian there. The problem with that is that since the power propagates through one by one, we need all of the pistons to retract one by one. So that the precise timing is maintained. Now that's actually not a problem so far. You can see them all retracting in turn, but when it comes to the last two, that is a problem because there's no extra rail providing longer pulse to this piston, and so that causes a big problem. That stops the piston worm from actually working properly. And so to get around that, we just need to hold this last piston extended for one more tick with an outside input there, and we can see that on the next example, which I'll go through.
So this is the layout we decided to go with for the powerings on each side. It's important that this layer starts at the bottom here, as this is where the first piston will be. And then these are just alternated all the way up to the top, where this stopped here. And we don't have to worry about the top line powering that piston because there'll be an immovable block at the top. And then this side's layout will start powering this block here. This is because during the first line of this running, this piston can be budded through this block, as you see. When this powers here, it can be budded, therefore we don't actually need it lower, which gives us a bit more space for the bottom and for the tape area here. I didn't mean to do that. If I haven't broken it, that's right. Each of these sides are connected by the repeaters along the top here, which is using a space underneath the layout at the top, which is otherwise unused. So we put these repeaters here. It should be noted that this timing is different for each of the other observerless doors, and some of them may use 3 ticks, which is then has a modified version of this monostable here, which is important to 1 tick those pistons.
Okay, so now the only missing part from that then is how do we get this specific clock length of 28 game ticks? Because we don't use this hopper timer because it actually, although it looks small, it does not fit well in the space that we have available. And so this is the design that we use instead. It's a bit peculiar, but nevertheless it does work. So the clock itself consists of this sand monostable and this piston with an armor stand. So what's going to happen is the piston is going to pull the sand block up. That's going to depower this piston. When the sand lands again, which it can do despite being on this torch because of the presence of a boat inside, which enables sand to fall onto blocks they wouldn't otherwise be able to fall onto. That will then repower the piston, activating this pressure plate for as a pulse, reactivating this, and that happens to be 28 game ticks. And the way we're going to activate this clock is by pushing up this piston. What's going to happen when we do that is it's going to push up this minecart. That will power this pressure plate, starting the clock, and moving this boat upwards. That enables the armor stand to have space for it to push up. And that also gives us an easy insight in how we're going to deactivate the clock. And it's quite simple. As soon as the tape starts, what's going to happen is this piston is going to be pushed down as part of the tape, and that's going to push the boat down, like so, making the armor stand unable to be pushed up into the pressure plate, stopping the clock. So that's how that system works, and we just use a direct output from this pressure plate going to a piston to activate this budded piston here, like so. And that is how we get our signal to the top and to the side inputs.
So following on from our previous clock, the next thing to sort out is how we get the tape downwards, and that's done by another piston worm along here at the top. Originally our layout had a line of redstone dust above here, but we decided that we had enough space to cut this off and replace it with a tripwire line here, which powers the top row, minus this block which is powered externally. But this would give us a problem as we didn't have enough storage blocks underneath for this tape to reach the bottom. Therefore, we added this extra line of rails and minecarts, which as they fell would activate this lower piston, allowing this worm to reach 1 block lower, which reaches the bottom of the door. So that allows us to get our full layout 1 block shorter. And then the only problem that comes with that is now starting this tape from the top.
Okay, and the way that we actually power all of these is based on a really simple clock. So as we know, worms are normally based off clocks, and this is the way we do this one. We just have this armor stand here connected to this piston, and what this is going to do, when this piston retracts, this armor stand is going to be pushed up slightly into the pressure plate, reactivating the piston at a regular clock speed. And we're going to transfer that signal downwards just using this piston here, which will get to this next pressure plate using the armor stand underneath. So all these lines will power simultaneously. So now what we need to do is we need to push the top piston down by 1 with the tripwire, and then activate the clock and stop the clock at the correct amount of pulses. So the way we power it is very simple. This repeater, the exact setup in this corner is slightly different in the actual door, but we power this one externally, then all the rest with the tripwire. which we just do by pushing along this minecart with the composter. It's a composter so that it will pull it back as well. And then that will, on the falling edge of the tripwire, that will activate the clock by pulling up this pigman. So we can see that like so. And the reason we use a pigman is it's got just the right hitbox and whatever, so that in this configuration, when it gets pulled up, it takes the exact amount of time to fall through the cobweb and reactivate the pressure plate as it takes for the pistons to all get to the bottom. So that happens. That's just a precise timing that just sort of happened to work, and it works very nicely. And this minecart which has fallen will just get pushed back up into the correct spot when the tape reascends. So while this pigman thing is very nice, it doesn't actually work on all of the doors. Some of them didn't have the space for it, or just had different requirements. And one of the examples is over here, which was used in the 8x8.
So this is our top worm circuit from the 8x8. And this one works in a slightly different way to the one on the 9x9, but it still uses this same armor stand clock, just in a slightly different configuration. So the way we start this one is the same. We will power this top line from the control circuit over here. That will power this top line here, and send an item from this dropper to this hopper through an upwards and sideways floated minecart. If you want to see how those work, you can probably find a video on Armor's channel about floated minecarts. But essentially this will take an item from this dropper and send it into this back hopper whilst staying underneath the hitbox of the door. This will then turn off this comparator underneath here when it reaches the dropper, which is in turn going to lock this hopper and turn off this piston right here, starting the clock. As the clock goes, more items are going to be sent across into this dropper, keeping this comparator on and locking all of the items in this chest minecart. This will then do the certain number of clocks that we need it to do until all the items run out. This will then turn on this torch again, stopping the clock, and therefore that'll be when it's reached the bottom of the door. This will also then automatically reset by allowing the items from this hopper right here to pass through this chest minecart here, hidden underneath the dropper, and pass them into the hopper again, back to where they started. It should also be noted that this door uses the same rail trick as shown before in the 9x9 to cut one off the height of the door, as again originally we used to have an extra layer up here.
But doing this actually causes an issue in that if this piston here, the top piston, were to be in line with all the rest, i.e. there, when it reaches the bottom, it would actually cause an issue because the line that controls the upwards sending of the worm, i.e. this line, would actually power the pistons at the in the wrong position, which we can't have. And so in order to just get away from that problem, we have to have just this one row raised by one, which should have caused all kinds of issues really. And the main one being that we need to power this top piston. And so the way we do that is with this target block here. So when we power the yellow circuit for the first time, what's going to happen is it's going to push over this target block, and then it'll be able to push down. But the reason why it has to push the target block over in the first place is the other problem, and that is that there is nothing stopping this worm pushing up another time because there's no immovable block up here. The others don't have to worry about this, but this one here has that issue. And so the only way we can create an immovable block there is by just temporarily pushing this piston over so that this can't push. And the way we do that is very simple. We have an extra cauldron here in the stack, which will push a minecart temporarily into this pressure plate, which will power this piston here. And that is how that's the main difference with the 8x8. And we can also just watch this stuff happening. So when we activate the input, this is the closing edge. This piston here, for example, will activate the piston tape. And on the other edge, just before we activate the yellow, we've got to do one extra move, which is to power all of this row of pistons. And on this particular example, we do that very simply by activating this piston and this pressure plate just straight from the input via this repeater. And then the last one, which isn't necessary on most of the other doors, is we just have an extra piston, extra minecart here, pulling up, activating a detector rail, which actually is not, this detector rail, for example, is not actually there on the 9x9, it's not necessary. And that is just so that you have a 1 block gap, so that you have enough blocks in your push limit to push down. And then we can just watch this in action. And of course it's been truncated to only a few blocks just to save time, but we can adjust how long it will go down for just by adjusting the amount of items in this dropper circuit. Okay, so we're going to quickly go over the tape, which is really simple to the point where we didn't even need to make a separate demonstration from the others. It's, the way it works is very simple. So this is the starting piston. When this pushes over, it's going to push over this here witch, because its hitbox sticks out the bottom of the minecart, and that will activate this pressure plate, which will push down. There's needed to be this obsidian here because we're pushing upwards facing pistons, which would have priority, and so we need to block them with an immovable block here. The reason it's a witch, and there are other witches here, is that witches automatically regenerate their health when they suffer suffocation, and that enables the witch to always have enough health, and it won't die, which obviously will stop the door from working. And just in case you're wondering, they actually regenerate health even with a no AI tag, meaning that they fall within the remit of the within the rules of the redstone squid records, for all that's worth. And we have a similar, just simple pusher over on this side. This witch gets pushed over into here, pushing the piston up, and same with this armor stand gets pushed up and just activates this piston, but doesn't, crucially, when there's a chain, because the chain is too small has too small a hitbox to push the armor stand. The only slightly different part is this here corner, and the reason for that is because if we just have 4 of the same, we just basic mob pushers, the speed doesn't work out quite. It's a bit too fast and it will break. So we need to just slow it down a bit. And so on this side, the mob pusher, instead of directly powering this piston like so, instead pushes down this piston first, which then on its retraction pulls up this armor stand to activate this piston, and so we just gain a little bit of delay by the extension and retraction of this piston, which makes the tape just about slower enough for it to work, and we'll see that when we activate the door later.
So the last circuit to cover now is the closing circuit, which is actually controlled from the tape, because the tape is both the first thing to power and the last thing to power in this door. So when it's powered first during the closing, once the tape is finished, we want to start the closing. So here we have a little timer, which is going to pull this minecart up and into this cobweb, and this piston right here is going to keep pulsing and pulling it up into this cobweb until the tape stops. Then the minecart is going to be allowed to drop back down and activate this pressure plate. This pressure plate then goes down just redstone blocks and down to this little toggle here, which is just a glorified T flip-flop, which is then going to power this bottom line of pistons. This will also update, well, first of all it will power this torch and then turn off, which will let this burnout run. This burnout will also run up to this line here, which will update this burnout. So essentially the worms will work off of burnouts until it gets to a point up here. Because we need the worms to push the top block here so that we can use all the storage blocks and not have to have any filler blocks here, we use pressure plates at the top. Now these work in a cascading manner, which is powered first from this left hand side, and then this will activate this floated armor stand, which is floated inside of the pistons and then across 2 blocks. So as this most left hand side pushes up, it's going to activate this pressure plate here, which will then pull this side up, activating the next armor stand, which will continue and continue until all of the worms have reached up to this level, where these pistons are pushing here, where they will no longer push up these armor stands because they are too high. And apart from that, there's not really much to the closing circuit. It just works off of burnouts, and the only other time that this will power is the tape at the end, when this timer will run out again, go down here, the T flip-flop will not activate, and the closing will not power.
So we can watch that in action if we just activate the door. So first we'll get the tape activated immediately from this piston, and we can see each side, this smart piston here, this smart piston here, this sort of double thingy, whatever, here, and this other simple smart piston here. And then when the door gets to its completed state for the closing, we can then watch it happen. It creates some odd patterns at the end. I actually don't really know why it does that, but it doesn't matter because it closes. And then we'll just might as well watch it opening as well. So we can see everything that goes on here. See the yellow circuit working with the pigment slowly falling, and these detector rails activating. When this reaches the bottom, we activate this piston by pushing that silverfish down, activating the clock. That activates the main worm, which will push up to the top until we have this cauldron. We have one extra pulse that goes through due to the long delay, long chain of repeaters. That activates the final tape. And then we'll see, if I speed this up a little bit, we'll get to the final place, and we'll have this minecart will fall down, but it won't activate the closing again due to the toggle. And there we go. That's pretty much the whole 9x9 done. The other doors are very similar to this. The only exception perhaps is the 6x6, which is a bit more complicated. But
I don't think we've got time to explain all the intricacies of the 6x6.
I don't think so either. There are some world downloads in the description for 6x6 through 10x10, which you can explore at your leisure. But other than that, I think that's all that we wanted to go through in this video. So make sure you check out Jonny's channel, which there'll be a link for in the description. And yeah, that's all for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.